Hello and a very warm welcome. My name is Udo Sendai-Dukai, and in this video I talk about a super simple and free plugin that you can use to make your sound even more perfect. And of course I also provide some background information. Before we start, please ensure that this option, the consistent volume, is switched off. Normally I tag all my videos as music, so it should be switched off by default, but if not, please switch it off. So the examples, the sound examples I'm doing are not distorted in any way. Then let's get started. The plugin that does a wonderful job of fine-tuning your sound is the plugin ToTape8 by Chris Johnson, who programs the Airwindows plugins for Linux, Windows and macOS. Thanks to the developer Bacon Paul, the plugin has now been combined into a complete package called Airwindows Consolidated. Bacon Paul is one of the core developers of the Surge XT synthesizer, also a very good and free plugin for which I have already created 2 workshops in German and English. I have of course linked all the links to the plugins for you in the first comment, and of course I would also be delighted if you would leave a comment and a thumbs up. Before we really get started, here are 5 practical tips on the Airwindows Consolidated plugin. At the top left of the 3-dotted hamburger menu is the Filter by Collection menu. By default, Recommended is selected here. If you want to see all plugins, switch the plugin to All plugins. If, for example, you want the ToTape8 plugin to be the default plugin that is automatically loaded when Airwindows Consolidated is opened, then you can set Make ToTape8 your default effect at the bottom left of the settings, next to the gear wheel. Of course, it will only say ToTape8 if you have selected ToTape8. If you have selected something else, you can define the other plugin as the default. At the top right, next to the up-down arrows with which you can scroll through the plugins, there's a heart with which you can add the current plugin to your favorites. And, of course, remove it again. The favorites are also located in the hamburger menu. To the right of the settings gear wheel, the input level can be adjusted. And on the lower right side, the output level. And at the bottom right, you can use the on-off button to switch the bypass of the plugin on and off. But back to the ToTape8 plugin, which you can find in the Airwindows Consolidated packet under Tape and then ToTape8. What can the Power plugin do, or what function does it actually have? In a nutshell: tape saturation distortion, compression peak reduction, bias hysteresis, noise reduction or Dolby, analog flutter, head bump, clipper. I try to go through the points roughly, but I'll have to explain 1 or 2 things in more detail so that the way they work and how they interact with other functions becomes clear. Because I'm saying saturation and distortion here, I would like to point out that, to put it simply, saturation is usually distortion with compression, and distortion is just distortion. Tape saturation is usually associated with magnetic recording tapes. Tape, like any other storage medium, naturally has its physical limits and can only operate within them. These small music cassettes from the 70s and 80s, for example, have a signal-to-noise ratio of 50 dB to almost 70 dB. This is the entire dynamic range for the audio signal before the quiet signals disappear into the noise. For comparison, 16-bit digital has a dynamic range of 96 dB. The cassettes have a frequency bandwidth of 20 Hz as the lowest limit, up to 12 kHz, and the hi-fi versions up to almost 20 kHz. According to the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem, this is twice as much, namely 24 kHz to 40 kHz. This is just to compare the common naming of 44.1 kHz and 48 kHz. The professional reel-to-reel tape machines from, for example, the Swiss companies Studer or Revox, and of course all other manufacturers such as Braun, Technics, Arkai, Denon, Grundig, Marantz, Philips, Pioneer, and so on, naturally had even better values depending on the tape's used, speeds and other characteristics. Nevertheless, all devices have their limits, so large dynamic fluctuations and low and high frequencies that were too far apart had to be accommodated somehow within these limits. On the one hand, storage on magnetic tape already provides analog wave shaping. This is comparable to what we know from a peak limiter or soft clipper. And secondly, the reduction of the bandwidth to around 20 kHz or 40 kHz, you remember Nyquist, at best also result in additional squeezing. In contrast to later compact disc 44.1 kHz or DAT 48 kHz. But I ramble on. To put it briefly and very simply, if there is enough space to store everything, ways have to be found to sort out and reduce parts. Hence the wave shaping by the magnetic tape that cut off frequencies that were too loud. In other words, dynamic reduction. A bit like a compressor, and the reduction of the frequency bandwidth to 24 kHz in the worst case and around 40 kHz in the best case. To put it simply, with more input, the signal is made louder, and with increasing input, the loudest signals are pushed to the upper limits first. Then the increasingly quieter signals are pushed to the upper limit and also cut off or wave shaped. In other words, it becomes more and more distorted. Then there is the bias. The tape is first erased and then pre-magnetized. This is because of the so-called hysteresis. Simply put, hysteresis is a delay or a slow reaction. Translated, this means that the volume increase on a magnetic tape is not at all linear to the material. It looks more like a curved S-shape integral symbol from math class, with a hanging belly at the bottom and a rounded back on the top. In between is something similar to a straight line. So hysteresis says here, it's really not linear, takes a bit longer at the bottom and has a hanger at the top. And as I said, this non-linear increase in volume is caused by the sluggishness of the magnetized particles. This means, for example, that quiet signals may be completely lost because the magnetization does not react to the weak signal at all. And now the bias finally comes into play. And this is also available in two variants, as an alternating current variant and as a direct current variant. In other words, AC-DC. The AC version became established, in which a very high frequency and therefore inaudible tone was added at least from 40 kHz and actually mostly somewhere around 150 kHz, which was only intended to ensure that the volume of the entire signal was increased. And this trick ensured that this sluggish hysteresis area was excited more quickly at the bottom, so that even quiet signals were picked up properly by the magnetized particles on the tape. However, as I said, this also ensures that the overall volume increased and therefore affected the loudest signals by pushing them to the upper limit earlier and then wave shaping them. Essentially, making quiet signals audible versus distorted loud signals, or losing quiet signals and keeping loud signals clear. There were different noise reduction systems. The best known were Dolby A, B, and C. The various noise reduction systems were implemented by compression, meaning that loud signals become quieter and quiet signals become louder, or the volume of the overall signal is increased. By compressing different frequency band divisions during recording, and during playback by expansion, meaning that loud signals become louder and quiet signals become quieter by expanding the different frequency band divisions. In very slang terms, the process during playback could perhaps be described as decompression. However, this is meant more as a supporting linguistic image. The tilt knob is a bandpass filter that defines the frequency range when compressing, and shape is the bandpass filter that defines the frequency range when expanding. If these two are identical, nothing really happens. If these two are different, low and high signals are audibly amplified and attenuated. Flutter or Wow and Flutter, or in German Gleichlaufstörung or Gleichlaufschwankung, simulates the current fluctuations or material degradation and creates a whine or whimper that can also affect the stereo field. The Flutter knob controls how strong and audible the effect is, and the Flutter speed knob controls how fast the effect whines or howls. Flutter knob controls how strong and audible the effect is, and the Flutter speed knob controls how fast the effect whines or howls. The head frequency is used to select a frequency between 25 Hz and 200 Hz, and the head bump is used to boost or attenuate this frequency with a bell EQ. This can be used to boost or attenuate low frequencies again. With the right frequency and a little boost, you can usually achieve a wonderful warm sound. However, the amplification contributes to the overall volume and therefore influences the hysteresis and the wave shaping again. ToTape8 also has a built-in clipper that works automatically in the restaurant at the end of the universe and therefore has no setting option. Finally, the output can be used to amplify or reduce the volume of the signal. And don't forget the bypass button to check what your settings are actually doing to the sound. A few more notes. It is important to remember that tape saturation is a distortion with compression. This means that it can significantly reduce transients under certain circumstances. However, this possible disadvantage has also the advantage that dynamics are reduced, which in turn can increase the loudness or density of the sound, or that you get more harmonic overtones, or that sharp frequencies are softened. The distortion can also make clear sounds slightly too heavy britzelig. Sometimes the modulator britzel pop is quite intentional, but sometimes not. Basically, it's like any mix. Every advantage also has a disadvantage, and it's the balance or compromise that counts. To summarize again extremely briefly the overview. The input amplifies or attenuates the input signal. When amplifying the loud signals that reach the upper limit, the threshold, are truncated using this tape saturation algorithm. The bias mimics the sluggish material properties, the hysteresis of magnetized particles, and therefore has an influence on the quietest and loudest signals. The noise reduction, Dolby system, tilt and shape have an influence on low and high frequencies with the shifting of the bandpass filters for compression and expansion. Flutter imitates the current fluctuation and material locking noise of a tape deck. Head bump boosts or attenuates frequency in the 25 to 200 Hz range. Don't panic, the built-in clipper works fully automatically. And use the bypass to check your changes from time to time. So, I'm going to play with the sound demo again to finish it off. Before you leave me a comment and just say hi or hello or tell me your thoughts. It would be very nice. Weste, ik ben ein Berliner. My name is Untitled Chapter. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope to see you soon again in the next video. Stay healthy, save the future, take care, see you then. Ciao, ciao.